Hello, and welcome to Philosophy of Religion. We're going to talk about the second presentation on cosmological arguments, the Kalam Cosmological Argument, or the temporal cosmological argument. In the first presentation, we looked at the Thomistic and the Leibnizian versions of the cosmological argument, and now we're going to look at the version resurrected by William Lane Craig of the medieval Islamic argument given by Al-Kindi and Al-Ghazali. So, I'm going to first mention a personal note of finding the Kalam in the book. In that book right there, Scaling the Secular City by J.P. Moreland, when I was an undergraduate at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Then we'll look at Al-Ghazali's Kalam Cosmological Argument. I think that's missed in a lot of the videos Craig does on YouTube. And then I will quickly go over William Lane Craig's three dilemmas. Now, there's no reason for you guys to listen to me when you can listen to William Lane Craig. He's debated many atheist philosophers and presents this argument. He has put many podcasts on his website, reasonablefaith.org. So listen to Craig explain it and not me. You'll be much better off. All right. Personal note. We can skip some of the stuff about set theory. Don't worry about that. And this is an introductory philosophy of religion course. You weren't required to take logic for this course, and we'll just look at some of the basic things. Okay. Let me tell you a bit of my story. I became a Christian in 7th grade. One day in church at College Hill Presbyterian in Cincinnati, Ohio, this preacher who was talked about his basketball injury. He played at Division I college, and how he couldn't play his senior year. And I was in junior high, and I was going to be in the NBA. I knew it. But to hear that story, God, I think, used that story to touch me and open me to, wow, there's got to be more in life than just living for basketball. And I was like, wow, I need Jesus. I need the person of Jesus, and to follow this guy, there's nobody greater. And so the next 6 years, I studied my Bible, was engaged in fellowship and service in my church, and grew a lot. But I didn't have the intellectual component. I had great role models who lived out biblical principles and showed me that this worldview is true in that way. And also had many prayers answered, and I felt God's presence at numerous times in answered prayers and worship experiences and whatnot. And when I went to study marine science in Eckerd College in St. Pete, Florida, the problem of pluralism really struck me. We're going to deal with that later in the semester, but the problem of pluralism is, what about all these religions? How could billions of people be wrong? Maybe there's many paths to God and such and such. So I was like, do we really need Jesus? And postmodernism struck me in the sense that, can I really distinguish one religion from another intellectually as one? Can we really analyze the different components of worldviews to see if one's more plausible than the other? And so I didn't know what philosophy was, and I didn't think you could reason about it. So, this second bullet point here, Miami University, Oxford, Ohio. In 1993, this was the first rigorous argument, the Kalam, for God's existence that I ran across in my time of seeking for the truth about God. I had 3 French tutors, and I just started taking my first philosophy class, and it rocked my world. And I expressed worries to one of my French tutors, and she gave me this book, Scaling the Secular City. And the first chapter in that book is the Kalam Cosmological Argument. And I was shocked to discover that such a thing existed. If you're a postmodernist and you think that there's no rational reason why people believe religions, and you can't argue for one worldview over another and analyze and critique these things, then you're going to be shocked to find that people give arguments and reasons to believe one worldview versus another, and that's where I was. So it simply blew my mind to find out that people were trying to give reasons to believe the claim that a particular type of God existed, to the exclusion of others. I was a confused postmodernist at that point, and I found hope for the first time. Even if the Kalam argument didn't work, the discovery was already made. There may be hope to wade through this religious mess in the world with the tools of philosophy. Now, my MA in the philosophy of religion, which happened to be under J.P. Moreland and William Lane Craig, was motivated by my own personal quest. I really didn't care about anyone else and what they were doing and where they were going when they died. I cared about my own life and myself. Now, some students just don't care. They're into their own lives right now, and dating and school or whatever. They just don't care about the big questions in life. For me, it was a huge issue at this point. I was like, does God exist? When I found philosophy, I really had major stress about finding out if God existed or not. So, and I was worried about myself, and that's why I studied world religions and everything else. But some people just don't care. So it surprises me when people think differently. For example, they think they are okay because they are part of a 2 billion person strong worldview religion, and of course 2 billion people cannot be wrong, but I guess it shouldn't. I'm sure my attitude was similar before I ran across the tools and found the hopes that philosophy could give. Also, many people just do not have the time or energy, given bills and commitments and the like, to really seek like I did when I made it part of my undergraduate career at Miami. Okay, background. This argument comes from the brilliant philosophers, Islamic philosophers, Al-Ghazali and Al-Kindi. So you can look these guys up and see their significance. Now, Christian philosophers on the Kalam, Thomas Aquinas did not endorse the Kalam argument. So he argued for God's existence on the more difficult assumption of the eternity of the world. If you read Summa Contra Gentiles, you see Aquinas says, listen, it would be very easy to argue for God's existence if everybody in the world believed there was a beginning of the universe. But he said most people don't believe in a beginning of the universe, so we have to argue on the assumptions that the atheists have and the skeptics. So we'll start from the more difficult assumption that the universe is eternal. All right, they didn't have the Big Bang science we do today to tell us that it's more plausible than not that the universe had a beginning. Okay, or the multiverse on those views has a beginning. St. Bonaventure, he was 13th century. He actually did develop the Kalam Cosmological argument, and he offered further examples of the absurdities of actual infinites with regards to revolutions of the sun and the moon. All right. Terminology: a finite series is a countable series of something. So, we're talking about puppies or stars or grains of sand if it's countable. Infinite series, an uncountable series of something. All right. Temporal phenomena. These are events which occur in time. So, birthday parties, classes, elections, winters, marriages. Right now, President Barack Obama is giving his 2015 State of the Union address. And Joe Biden and Speaker Boehner are sitting behind him. Actually, Boehner's district is exactly 1 mile from here, the edge of it, if anybody cares. So, infinites, potential versus actual infinites. Potential infinites are infinites for mathematicians discussed in the classroom and on paper. Actual infinites are infinites that appear in the real world of stars, puppies, dominoes, people, water molecules, and the like. Okay? So the crux of these arguments, for at least the first dilemma, will be whether or not an actual infinite can exist in reality. Specifically, an actual infinite number of temporal events. Alright, let's look at Al-Ghazali, his argument contained in The Incoherence of the Philosophers. Premise 1. Everything that begins to exist requires a cause for its origin. Premise 2. the world began to exist. Why? He defends this with the following claims. There are temporal phenomena in the world. These are preceded by other temporal phenomena. These series of temporal phenomena cannot regress infinitely. An actually infinite series involves various absurdities. Therefore, the series of temporal phenomena must have had a beginning. Therefore, the world has a cause for its origin, its creator. Okay? Remember, temporal phenomena are things like minutes or years. So 2015 is preceded by 2014, by 2013. Or you can carve it up and talk about events. And just count your birthday parties. Think about that. Because some students will say, oh, we can't have a concept of time and that kind of thing. But just think about common sense view of events that happen. This State of the Union address was preceded by the 2014 State of the Union address, was preceded by the 2013 State of the Union address. And just keep on counting those back and just pick other events in the past. All right. Let's look at Al-Ghazali's argument for premise 2. There are temporal phenomena in the world. This class, semester of 2015, our births, all of our births in this classroom, are temporal phenomena. George Washington crossing the Delaware, Vikings conquering Dublin, etc. Those are all temporal phenomena or events. Each temporal event is preceded by other temporal phenomena. So all those events have events that went on before. But the series of temporal phenomena cannot regress infinitely. We can't have an actually infinite existing series of temporal events, moments in time. Conclusion, therefore, the series of temporal phenomena must have had a beginning. Now let's look at how he argues for, and actually some of these absurdities with infinites. Alright, let's look at this diagram, the infinity symbol, and then you have the present moment on the bottom right of your screen, and then all these hash marks on the line are going forward. Alright, Al-Ghazali gave these examples. Jupiter and the Sun circling Earth. Remember, the medievals believed in a geocentric universe, the Pythagorean Aristotelian universe. The ratio is 7 to 1. So the Sun circles the Earth 7 times to every 1 revolution that Jupiter makes. If both Jupiter and the Sun have been circling Earth for an actual infinite number of times, is it not true that they have circled the Earth the same number of times? It's a rhetorical question, but you're starting to see where the absurdities come in. In the other example, revolutions of the Sun. If we assume that the Sun has been circling the Earth for eternity past, is the number of revolutions odd or even? I hope that helps. The point of Al-Ghazali's puzzles is a move called a reduction to absurdity, reductio ad absurdum. So Al-Ghazali was trying to show that an actual infinite cannot exist in reality. If it did, it would lead to these absurdities. So that's the general strategy of reduction to absurdity. Assume a present and show that it leads to various absurdities. Assume that actual infinites exist and show they lead to absurdities. If so, then the original premise is shown to be false. So the concept of the infinite is only interesting for philosophers and mathematicians to explore in the mind. It's not something we find in the world of rocks, puppies, stars, grains of sand, water molecules, and moments in time. Alright. So think about this. Post on the discussion board what's not clear. Email me or and such. Alright. These 2 examples he gives to strategy, reduction to absurdity. Alright. William Lane Craig. Remember his website if you want to look up podcasts or articles on the Kalam, reasonablefaith.org. He does a good job on his podcast of answering objections that people write in. So get on there, look at the podcast if you want to listen, and then see all the Kalam ones. He's research professor at Talbot School of Theology, which is part of Biola University. And he just joined the philosophy department at Houston Baptist University. Actually taught at Houston Baptist University last fall. And he was there to do a week-long class and give lectures. But that's one of the perks if you're a big shot scholar. You don't have to teach, though I love teaching. All right. The Bible and William Lane Craig. Reasonable Faith. He has a new book called On Guard, which he has the new design argument in that. And he's been called the best debater in North America. He's got, I think, 50-some debates on YouTube. And when I had Philosophy Club, we would look at some of those debates and analyze them. So he debates some of the top New Testament scholars in the world who are skeptics, top physicists, top atheists, and that kind of thing. So, yeah, for fun on a Friday night, watch him debate. And even on this, see how he interacts with people in the Kalam. And it will be interesting to hear your objections to the Kalam presented by various philosophers in these debates. All right? Okay. All right. Fire up the real PowerPoint if you want to get to these YouTubes. But you can just type in these titles. What is the Kalam Cosmological Argument? William Lane Craig. And there's 98 different Kalam videos to choose from if you click on that link. And yes, Reasonable Faith, if you're subscribed to Dr. Craig videos, or go to that channel and then look for those excerpts from the Kalam. All right, summary of the Kalam argument. The Kalam cosmological argument is the temporal argument for God's existence and is distinguished from the three ways, the Thomistic arguments, and the Leibnizian argument. It aims to show that the beginning of the universe was caused by a powerful, intelligent, and personal being. Three dilemmas which you need to know. One, the universe either had a beginning or no beginning. And he argues that there's a beginning. Second, the beginning of the universe was either caused or uncaused. Third, the cause of the beginning of the universe was either personal or impersonal. Now, something good with philosophy, practice these arguments on your friends and family. So, if you're at the coffee shop or dinner table or a bar this weekend, try this out. Draw this on a napkin and work through this argument. The best way to try to learn philosophy is to try to understand these arguments and practice them over and over again. And arguments for and against. You want to learn both sides of the coin here. Okay? So, he's arguing that the beginning of the universe was caused by a personal agent or being, and that's God. Okay. First, beginning versus no beginning. If there's a beginning, a finite series of temporal events exists. If there's no beginning, an actual infinite series of temporal infinite events will exist. Craig uses three arguments to argue that the second option, B, is impossible. One, an actual infinite cannot exist. Second, even if we grant the existence of an actual infinite series of events, it can never be traversed or crossed. In other words, it's impossible to form an actual infinite by successive addition. In less fancy words, you can't count to infinity. And then third, Big Bang cosmology points to a beginning of space and time. Some add a fourth argument here from science. Second law of thermodynamics points to a beginning of the universe. All right. First argument for a beginning. Premise 1, an actual infinite cannot exist. Premise 2, a beginningless series of events in time is an actual infinite. Conclusion, therefore a beginningless series of time cannot exist. Now premise 1 here is the problematic premise. To argue for this, Craig uses the following paradoxes to show that infinites are useful only in mathematics and not in the real world. Hilbert's Hotel and the library with an infinite number of red and black books. Go on some of these websites, Google Hilbert's Hotel to try to get a grip on that. The library with an actual infinite number of red books, actual infinite number of black books. Puzzle is if you take away all the black books, you still have the same number of books. Another puzzle is this. Imagine that one of the red books has an actual infinite number of pages in it. The puzzle is this. A person who reads that book will have read the same number of pages as someone who's read every page of every book in the library. All right. So you can read about Hilbert's Hotel there if you want, or just focus on the easier examples of the red and black library books. Again, the library with the actual infinite number of red books, actual infinite number of black books. If you take away all the black books, you still have the same number of books. Second one again, imagine that one of the red books has an actual infinite number of pages in it. A person who reads that book will have read the same number of pages as someone who has read every page of every book in the library. This is meant to show that the concept of an actual infinite might be useful in the theoretical world, but it leads to absurdities in the real world of books. Okay. The second philosophical argument for the beginning of the universe. Even if we grant the beginninglessness of the universe, it is impossible to traverse an actual infinite. Since historical events accumulate one at a time, passing through time is like trying to form an infinite via successive addition. In other words, it's impossible to count to infinity. Two examples, one, an infinite number of dominoes, and secondly, a ladder with infinite number of rungs. The point of the following examples is to show that it is impossible to form an actual infinite via successive addition. In other words, traverse an actual infinite number of entities. In other words, count to infinity, or to climb up an infinitely runged ladder. So, does this make sense? Craig is going to grant, for the sake of argument, that an actual infinite series of temporal events exists. But even if that's the case, it will be impossible, he argues, to move from one end to the other, to traverse or cross an actual infinite. So traversing or crossing an actual infinite is the same as forming an actual infinite series by successive addition. In other words, counting to infinity is the same as trying to walk back through time to the beginning, but there is no beginning. Doug Guyvet's example, he's another professor at Biola Talbot. He says, imagine an infinite number of dominoes is set. Imagine that you flick the first domino with your finger and knock it over. Will the last domino ever fall in an infinite series of dominoes? No, they'll be falling forever. In the same way, if there are an infinite number of temporal events in the past, it would be impossible to reach the present moment. So if we look at this diagram, timeline of temporal moments, present moment, actual infinite past, temporal moments, ladder example. Imagine that the present moment is the top of the ladder. Now, imagine that the top rung of the ladder represents the present moment or timeline. And imagine this infinity ladder is in an infinitely deep hole to represent the actual infinite number of moments in the past. If we start from the present moment and work backwards, in other words, climb down the ladder, will we ever reach the bottom? No. And if we start from the past, will we ever get to the present moment? No. It's like an escalator ladder. More importantly, can we even start climbing the ladder at all? I hope this is interesting. Now, if we start from the present moment and work backwards, will we ever reach the bottom? If we start from the past, will we ever get to the present moment? So yeah, it's like being on an escalator, never reaching the top. Thus, William Lane Craig concludes, even if we assume an actual infinite past exists, it leads to serious problems. Thus, we have to conclude there is a beginning of time. Now, this presents problems for other worldviews. So, Mormonism, on most views, it holds to an infinite past. And what's the problem? We haven't reached godhood yet. We should all be gods by now. All right. Buddhism, the versions that hold to an infinite past. And to the point where all of us have been each other's spouses, kids, arch enemies, best friends in past lives. But I'm sorry, I don't remember you guys being my spouses in past lives. We just forget about that. So we've all been alive an infinite number of times. The problem is, why haven't we reached nirvana yet? How many more lives do we need than an infinite number of lives? So that leads to an absurdity, a big problem. Same thing with Hinduism. Versions of that hold to an infinite hold. Not all versions of Hinduism. Madhva and Ramanuja disagree with Shankar on these views, but I think Madhva does believe in infinite past. So yeah, the problem here is, why haven't we reached moksha yet? So I think these are severe objections for those worldviews. Depending on if they cannot give up an infinite past, there's big problems for their plausibility. All right, third argument. Now we get to the two scientific arguments. The first one is Big Bang cosmology. This theory argues that there is a beginning of both space and time, approximately 13.7 billion years ago. Now this might change. Like, the multiverse theory is popular, but multiverse theories, most of those still argue that there is a beginning of time. Okay. Fourth argument, second law of thermodynamics states that all systems will move towards a state of equilibrium with regards to usable energy and heat. So since we still have hot stars that haven't yet used all their nuclear energy, there's still usable energy. Eventually all the usable energy will burn out in this universe and dissipate. So this shows the universe is not infinitely old. Again, these scientific arguments, you can critique those. I think the more important ones are the philosophical arguments, because in 100 years, 200 years, our science could change. All right, remember the three dilemmas. Now we move to the second dilemma, cause or no cause. So if the first argument worked to establish the universe had a beginning, we need to ask if this beginning had a cause of its existence, or if it did not have a cause of existence. It was uncaused, just happened. Now, which is more reasonable in your mind? And this is similar to Leibniz's principle of sufficient reason. Are there any events that are uncaused? So Craig concludes it makes much more sense that the event was caused. All right. Now, some of my naturalist or scientific atheist friends, they just eat it, and they just say it was uncaused, and that believing in God is more complicated than believing in. It's harder to believe in than there being a reason why the Big Bang started. That's fine, but for most people, as we mentioned, Lawhead and others, it seems more philosophical to attribute cause to something. But you guys, we'll debate this on the discussion board. Third dilemma, personal or impersonal. All right. Necessary conditions, sufficient conditions. You want to read those. There's Bill Ramey's explanation of this. And if you want to pause it and read that, he talks about lighting a match, leads to various problems. If the necessary and sufficient conditions were present, then they should have been already there. The universe should have ignited an infinite series ago, but leads to the same problems. All right. Let's, for the final exam, be able to explain the bare bones argument on the final exam. And post what you think. Daniel Dennett, he's one of my favorite naturalistic philosopher besides David Papineau and Chalmers and some others. But you'll see Dan Dennett's critiques of the Kalam on this bit here. There's other objections if you want to fire it up, but it'd be more fun if you look Yeah, some people say, why not before the first event? If there's a first event, there has to be an event before that. Moreland's response is this: time did not exist, so asking the question, what happened before, is a category mistake. Category mistake is like asking what the color blue tastes like, or what middle C or a G chord smells like. Secondly, one of my professor friends, I'm having dinner with him Thursday night. He said, wow, it's surely possible to traverse an actual infinite. And he just jumped 2 feet in the middle of the hallway and said, hey, there, I just crossed an actual infinite. So to deal with this objection, consider Zeno's paradoxes in the appendix of this presentation. All right. So go to the Kalam online resources. Reasonable Faith, Scaling a Secular City are good. Theism, Atheism, Big Bang Cosmology. That's where he interacts with Quentin Smith. Paul Draper, he's now at Purdue University. He has a critique of the Kalam Cosmological argument. And some more online resources. Zeno's paradoxes. So this ancient Greek talked about things that we are just going to skip. But Achilles and the tortoise. When I was a kid, I saw Bugs Bunny, Tortoise and the Hare, and so on. But I'm going to skip Zeno. If we were in class, we'd do it. But think about it. This is also a good thing to do on a Friday night. Try to win a free drink. See if someone can solve the problem of Zeno. All right. Alrighty, I think we'll quit there. This is the Kalam. Little half-baked, but hopefully it was helpful. It's 20th of January 2015. I think President Obama is finishing up soon his State of the Union. I've got to record it. I'm going to watch it in a second. Alright, I'll see you guys on the discussion board. Bye. Farewell.